the majority of that pregnancy was absolutely as expected, I suppose. And then he died when I was 37 plus 1 weeks pregnant on the 14th of January. So he stopped moving. We went in to get checked out, and they confirmed, I think, what I already knew, at least what we were worried about, obviously, that he had died, and he was born 3 days later.
Welcome, and today we have Jess, and she's going to tell us why she's here. Good evening, Jess.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. So, Jess, tell us why you agreed to talk to me.
Yeah, I think, so my son was stillborn in 2016, and since then, very, very early on, I started talking about him and what that experience is like. And I think it's really important to share what that experience is like so other people feel less alone, or so other people can learn what that's like and support those around them that are going through some form of, whether it be baby loss, whether it be grief or bereavement. I enjoy, if that's the right word, talking about it and everything that we've learned in that process.
Okay. Could you tell us about Leo?
Yeah. So Leo was born in 2016 in January. He was our first pregnancy. So me and my wife had gone through a couple of rounds of fertility treatment up until that point.
Okay.
So he was our first pregnancy, and the majority of that pregnancy was absolutely as expected, I suppose. And then he died when I was 37 plus 1 weeks on the 14th of January. So he stopped moving. We went in to get checked out, and they confirmed, I think, what I already knew, at least what we were worried about, obviously, that he had died, and he was born 3 days later. So £6.4, full term, head of dark hair, baby that we'd.
So you said he was born. He was born 3 days later.
Yeah.
But you already knew.
Yeah, so they confirmed that he died on the 14th. And what is typical, I suppose, for people whose babies die in pregnancy is that they then gave us meds to induce labour. And we had to go home, and we went back into hospital, and 3 days later I gave birth to him.
God. What were those 3 days like?
Horrendous. Just like a complete. It's just waiting. I think after those days there was relief, because he'd now been born. We were able to hold him, sort of look after him, and sort of start to process what was happening. The 3 days in between were just waiting, and you sort of didn't know what you were waiting for, so your mind, I guess, goes in all sorts of different places, because you have no actual
idea,
understanding of what this is going to look like and be like, and what the experience. So you get some information, but that's not necessarily going to be what your experience is. So it was just waiting for the unknown. So those 3 days, I think, were the most fearful of it all, because once he was born, we knew what we were dealing with at that point. And it may sound odd to some who haven't gone through it, but once he was born, he was safe, because we had him, we could see him, we understood what we were dealing with in that respect, in terms of the experience that we'd had. But before then, it was just a load of unknown. Those 3 days were probably the worst of that sort of short period initially.
Can't even imagine, just 3 days. It's a long time too.
Yeah, it is. And when they tell you that, you're sort of like, I go home. Okay.
And carry him.
Yeah. So still pregnant, go home, and we just wait. So I think we probably went back in 2 days later, but by the time I'd delivered him, it was 3 days later. So and then we stayed for 3 days following his birth in a bereavement suite. So that was sort of a whole week of just navigating that initial time.
So the road that led you, so you told us briefly about Leo. What was it? What was the road that led you to starting what you do now, the Legacy of Leo Baby Loss Hour on IG?
It was really, when I look back now and like you get those notifications of, it was so many years you set up an account or whatever.
Yeah.
I look back now and think, gosh, that was so soon. But there was sort of like a chasm of information. There was no information really that enabled us to feel, I suppose, confident in what we were walking ourselves into.
Yeah.
We were going to have a post-mortem, we were going to have a funeral, we didn't know what any of that looked like. We were sort of 30 something, and it hadn't happened to sort of our close friends or sort of family in that experience, so we didn't know what to look like. So you go online and you try and find things. So one part of me then found things that particularly around planning a funeral.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what that was going to look like for a baby. Like, what does a baby's funeral look like? And I found this one blog, and I wish I still knew what that blog was, but I've never stumbled upon it again. But it showed me a very different picture of what a baby's funeral could look like.
Yeah.
And that was so helpful. And I still kind of credit that as I sort of wanted to give back one other story into the world.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? To sort of pay back that gift that somebody else had given us,
mm-hmm.
to have that story out there online. But initially I just started writing into my notes app on my phone, because I just had all these thoughts going through my head and I just had to put them somewhere, because otherwise it was just too much.
Was that like a release?
Yeah, I just had to get it out.
Cathartic.
Completely get it out. So initially I started doing that online completely privately on a sort of a WordPress blog account, and then slowly started opening it up more and more publicly. But by doing that, I found other people that had gone through it, were going through it in the same sort of timelines we were. I did actually, we found somebody else, friends of ours that they weren't friends at the time, but friends now,
mm-hmm.
that had a baby who was stillborn called Leo on the same day that we did. So you find people, and there's connections, and there's things
mm-hmm.
that are sort of almost poetic that just make you feel less alone. So that's why I do it, to help me feel less alone, but help others feel less alone, really.
Yeah. And you, however, doing this bit, if there's one thing I've picked up from others, is that whatever it is you're going through, you're never alone.
No.
There's always someone out there who's either experiencing the same thing or going through the same thing.
Definitely.
Thank you. So, have you got any plans for it in the future? Are you planning to take it anywhere? It's the Legacy of Leo on Instagram. So we've done so much over the years. So initially, like I say, we literally I just started just talking. Just, if I had thoughts in my head, I'd just post it out onto Instagram, literally raw. Through that, I forgot to mention that I started Baby Loss Hour, which originally was a Twitter chat. And I did that for a good sort of 4-5 years maybe, and we peer-to-peer sort of and it did really well, and we were able to have conversations online with the community, but also charities and other people, sort of healthcare professionals working within baby loss. And I've really enjoyed it as a way of sort of joining the dots of all the sort of different people that are in this sort of community, as it were. And I stopped it for a little while, and then I've recently brought it back up on Instagram. And for me, it's just seeing where that goes. We've done live events in the past that may sort of come back, you never know how it goes, but it was really powerful to have conversations in a room full of other people that have gone through it. What was that event like? What was that event?
Yes, we did. I think we did 3 sort of back pre-pandemic. We did 3 sort of London, in Leeds, in Manchester, and I really like collaborating with charities. So we sort of did them in partnership with charities to sort of help raise some money and some sort of get them involved in the conversation as well. So we just sort of had a panel conversation.
Right.
People came along,
Okay.
had some food, met people
Yeah.
that they, for some people, it's the first time they'd ever really met other people that had gone through it.
And probably spoke about it as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So it wasn't a support group. I think, that's a very different sort of thing. It was very much more of an event in terms of having a panel discussion, having people talk about a certain topic, but inviting things from the audience. And it was just really like heartwarming to have people speak openly, honestly about their experiences without any sort of fear of what other people might think or anything like that.
Yeah. Things like, it's been 2 years, move on.
Like none of those cliches you get from from many other people.
So we spoke about catharsis, and you were writing notes and all that. Do you still find it cathartic now? However many years down the line. So what's that? 8 years now?
8 years, 8.5 years. Yeah, I do. I think it's different, and I've been sort of thinking quite a lot about this because I sort of stopped doing so much writing for a little while. And I think the difference is it's just less raw,
right,
and it's not as loud, and it's not as sort of immediate. So I used to write because I'd had a bad day, so I just needed to talk about something that had happened.
Pour it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And whereas now, I think I can, because I've done all of that sort of exploring, I suppose, if I have a bad day, I understand what it is. I don't necessarily need to unpick it by writing it all through, if that makes sense.
Yes,
so I do find it still sort of cathartic, but it's got, I suppose, less of an urgent need than it used to.
Yeah.
I think it used, previously it was a necessity, whereas now, I could probably sort of move on and find another sort of outlet or sort of talk about it at home or something. Whereas back then it was very urgent, I think.
So you, as you mentioned earlier, you got a wife, so you're one half of an LGBTQ couple, and you cover this aspect of yourself extensively in your blogs. I've read some of your blogs, and they're really good. And I'd like to read an excerpt from something you wrote. Okay. So you wrote this. I would describe being a same-sex couple experiencing baby loss as being in a small pond, within a small pond. Whilst neither pond is actually that small once you start swimming around in it, you have to search far and wide to find others like yourself. Well, what did you find in that? What did you find out when you started swimming in that pond, in that metaphorical pond?
Initially for me, it wasn't a layer. I talk a lot about layers in grief and our experience.
Yeah.
It wasn't a layer that I'd put much thought to. But what I did start to see was that because we were talking publicly, people would sort of refer or send people or signpost people to our blog, which is brilliant. But at the same time, it just really made me think, well, is there nothing else that's sort of meeting that perhaps need or...
Yeah, so nothing out there.
Yeah, it was that there's nothing that was quite hitting the mark for people. And so that's why I sort of began kind of talking about it a little bit more. And I think we'd had sort of the second or third sort of other family sort of explicitly signposted to us by a charity.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, there needs to be a little bit more conversation around this. So I did a small blog series just to try and gather some stories.
That's apart from
so other people sharing their experiences. And I think, and very easily, I'd say, discovered that there are people across the whole world And the thing is with baby loss as well and with the LGBT community is neither of those experiences are individual experiences.
No.
So, we talk about the LGBT community, but that is made up of
A
women,
spectrum of
men,
yeah.
trans men, trans women, people going through surrogacy, single people in families. That's a huge,
It's a whole spectrum.
it's a huge spectrum of family and parenthood and roots to parenthood as well. So within that, we've got, IVF, we've got AY, we've got surrogacy, we might have adoption. We've got so many different routes to parenthood, and then you've got so many different ways your baby can die. So when somebody's feeling really alone in their experience and they have all the different things that make up what their experience is, trying to find somebody that helps you relate or feel less alone can be really challenging because you've just got so much nuance. So I just think, the more and more stories that can be shared, or the more understanding of those things, the better, really. So I have done work with a number of different charities over the years, and they, I think, are really improving in their understanding and their response to that.
About baby loss.
I think more about just about different families and what kind of support and varying support for different families may not be needed for everyone. And it's not to say that everything, there's a lot of support out there for people. There's a lot of charities. It's not to say that's not going to meet the need for all sorts of different families. But for some people, they may need something that feels a bit safer.
Yeah.
Or that they can relate to a little bit more. And for me, it's just about having options for people. So that's why I sort of talk about it, so that people can think about it a bit more.
What has been the most rewarding thing about it?
I think probably other people reaching out, because the intention when I first started talking was, as long as one person feels sort of better or less alone, less then sort of job done, I suppose. And having messages like that people have maybe read something or heard something that they can relate to, because I think we all relate to things for so many different reasons, and that's why we need as many stories as possible out about the human experience, because it's just going to help us all feel less alone, whatever our situation is or challenge is or whatever it is that's adding to that isolation, I suppose. So when people tell me that, then I think, okay,
job done.
It's helping people. So that's a good thing.
And I'm pretty sure it does help people when they hear someone else talk about it so eloquently and
I hope so.
Discuss their pain openly. Well, thank you for saying that. So we talked about the most rewarding. What's been the biggest challenge so far talking about this topic?
That's a good question. The biggest challenge,
apart from the trolls and
fortunately, bar the odd local paper comment section,
right?
It's been okay in that respect.
Local paper comment section.
Yeah, I mean we've had a few articles. A few articles. I think it was the Oxford Mail.
Right.
And people do like to suggest that intentional fatherlessness and all of those things is the worst thing in the world and all sorts. It's fine.
Intentional fatherlessness.
That's local paper comment sections for you, I think. But
I think I've ever heard that phrase before.
I'm not really. I hope I've said it right, but
well, it makes sense now. You said it.
But challenging, I think, is probably. I find it a lot easier to talk sort of objectively about stuff. I find it quite hard to talk, and I can talk about my personal feelings. I think what I find harder to talk about is perhaps sort of the experiences we had with sort of friends and sort of colleagues and things like that around the time, particularly with then being public.
Right.
So what I say is accessible.
Yeah.
So I find those sorts of things quite hard to like navigate, or know that people perhaps follow along when perhaps our individual sort of real life experience at the time with sort of friends and colleagues was really difficult.
Yeah.
I think that it's sort of marrying that, like, this online world of Instagram versus your real day-to-day experience, as honestly as we may be. Sometimes that's just,
there's a disconnect.
Yeah, I think that's a good word. It just sort of rubs up against each other sometimes, I think.
Yeah. And some people, some of them well-intentioned, they just, when they say silence is golden, some people feel the need to say something.
Yeah.
Just so they can fill the silence, and they think, I need to say something, so I'll say something that I've heard before, or devoid of original thought, just to...
Yeah.
It's not even to make it feel better. Sometimes it's to make themselves feel better that they've said something.
Yeah.
They didn't leave it blank.
Yeah. And I think in our experience, and I think with quite a lot of people who experience baby loss, where it's so stigmatized and so awful, that often silence is all anyone has, and people just disappear because they don't even know how to approach it in the first instance. So some people may very well have managed that initial sort of condolences and then nothing, or they just go straight to nothing. And I think that change in who you have in your corner is that sort of, I think lots of people talk about it as a secondary loss, but it's really hard to sort of get your head around, because you don't have answers, you don't really have reasons as to why people perhaps just couldn't. So it's very hard sometimes to make up reasons.
Yeah.
And I think you have to remind yourself actually that you don't know.
Yeah.
And people just do the best they can, and sometimes that falls short. And you just have to be grateful for the support that you do have.
Thank you. So if there's something you want to change with regarding to conversations about stillbirth and baby loss, what would that be?
I think for people probably to realise that it happens so much more than you'll ever realise.
Yeah.
And it can have a real lifelong impact. So even though you can't see that impact necessarily, or even if you weren't even aware that baby was alive before they were lost, you may never have been aware that somebody lost a baby. The impact radiates for people. So just to have that like human compassion for everybody, I think it's sort of taught me that actually people, and I find this a lot with workplaces, I get quite sort of passionate about workplaces and how they can support people, because I think you have a choice. If somebody's having a challenge, whether it's baby loss or anything, someone has a challenge, as an employer, as a workplace or a colleague, you have a choice about making that experience easier or harder for somebody. And I can't quite find a reason why we would make it harder. Like why? And I'm sure people could give me lots of financial, boring, bureaucracy type reasons, but they're not. For me, they're not reasons.
Yeah.
So I think, with a friend, colleague, family member, like, if you find it hard, they're going to be finding it a lot harder. So what times, lean into that conversation, find a way to make it easier, and you'll be thanked for it.
Yeah. Thank you. So I don't know if she'll mind me saying this, but I've got a family friend in Australia. Well, it's basically the daughter of a very good friend of mine. she lost her baby 3 or 4 days after she was born. Her name was Amelia Ray. The baby was Amelia Ray. So, what would you say to her?
Be kind to yourself, I think, and relearn yourself. Like, you are still parent to her. You sort of experiment and explore what that looks like for you, and things that work for you, if they give you joy, if they make you feel closer to her, then do those things. It doesn't matter what anyone
Continue
else.
to celebrate her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And relearn yourself. Be patient. Like, you know, you can't have something like that necessarily happen and still be the same person. And you wouldn't have, even if she'd lived.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be the same person. So you have to relearn yourself, but you have to be so kind in the process, because.
And take your time.
Yeah. Like, this, it's a lot. And go with your gut. And I mean, you will look back at some point. And when I first started writing, I wanted to write also to evidence the fact that we'd survived. I didn't understand how we could get past a year.
Yeah.
I don't know what in my head I felt like was going to happen. I just didn't understand how that was possible. And we're 8.5 years on, and I can look back and say, yes, it's still hard, but we got past that somehow. Yeah. So you will have those moments where you laugh and you catch yourself and go, God. And even then you probably feel guilty for it, but be kind to yourself. Everybody deserves to laugh and have joy and all of those good things and cry. You'll have the whole breadth of human emotion. You've just got to be patient and be kind to each other as well. Like everybody, because everybody is trying to navigate it, and it's hard.
I can only imagine. Well, so thank you very much, Jess, for coming to talk to me. If you like what you saw here and heard here, please consider subscribing, give this video a like, and hopefully we'll make more of these conversations for you. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.